Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to talk a little bit about healing dark energies within yourself and the complications and the interesting things that happen when you do that. It's not a simple topic because when you talk about healing demonic beings, healing dark parts of yourself, healing aspects of other people, it's quite vast. Because we ourselves are made up of many different versions of ourselves. So you could say that our souls, we could be only 1% of our soul, and 99% of it is scattered all throughout the universe, for instance. It's when you start diving into the understanding of how vast we are, how unbelievably complex our souls are, you start to realize so many nuances and so many interesting facts that you come across. One of the things I came recently, because I was healing an actual angel, and this angel had one wing and half its body was kind of intact, the other half was kind of really not very good shape at all. Like, it didn't have any wings, it only had one eye, so it was like half its body was there, the other half was kind of like a shadow version of itself. It's kind of like that. So when you look at that aspect, that angel was imprisoned. So when you go visit that angel, it was in prison, but one of the questions it asked me is, where's the other half of itself? Where's the other version of itself? And where's the other aspect of who I am? So when I went to look at that, I seen that the other part of himself was pure light. And that version of himself was also imprisoned. It's very interesting. So that soul, that angel had the two parts. Obviously, it probably had more, but those parts of itself need to be freed in order for them to heal itself. So you could take the light side out of the imprisonment, and then you're able to heal the dark side of himself, because you can merge the two together, and then that balances it out and it becomes in balance and healed. The problem is that the light side imprisoned the dark side, and the dark side imprisoned the light side, because the light side didn't even want to be set free either, which is an interesting thing in itself. So in order to heal that angel, you have to have the light side to do it. And there's this war that's continuously going on in the spirit realm. It's been going on forever. If you want to call it a war, is probably not the best way of putting it. But there's always this conflict that happens between the light and dark sides of ourselves. When we imprison these parts, you're not able to heal a person or a being. So, in the right way. So in other words, you need both sides or access to one side or the other to be able to hear it. Most cases, there's a dark side of ourselves have a light aspect to it that you can get that dark part to remember the light, and then at that point the light becomes brighter, and then the being remembers who it and what it is, and then there's a transformational process that happens that heals that being. But if that being is basically only, like, if the dark side's been removed, for instance, it was a way back when the angels first came here, you call them fallen angels, whatever you want to call them. They came here to help the human race. And some of those angels were torn into two pieces. They were literally, the light and dark sides were separated. And when they were separated, they're supposed to eventually come back together again. But if then both parts are imprisoned, that angel's trapped forever in that state until one side or the other gets set free in order to be able to transform the other side of it. So what do you do if your part's imprisoned? It's like, because one of the things I do all the time is I go into people that have a dark side. you actually find that dark side of the person, you're able to bring that back into the light because you have access to the other part of the soul, which is light. Then you can transform that. But there is certain times you come across a dark part of a being, a person, that is so twisted and messed up, it doesn't have any side, the opposite side, that you can pull from in order to be able to heal it. So you have to imprison it. So when does that cycle ever end? The problem is that somewhere along the line, the dark version or the light version of that is also imprisoned. Because if you can't heal something, it means there's another part of itself that's also imprisoned. So when is it going to stop? At some point, when are people going to start imprisoning both sides? Because when both sides are imprisoned, nothing is ever going to heal. So you have to be able to lift the veil of everything, light and the dark imprisonments, in order for us to be able to truly heal. Because we most, like when you come to this earth, you have both light and dark sides. They all have to be in balance. You can't imprison the two parts of yourself and expect to heal from it. You never will. So when you're forced, because your soul knows, if I go to someone and there's a part of themselves that cannot be healed, you have to take that. Imprison's the wrong way of putting it. It's a place where you put a soul that has to be able to, that is not going to cause any more damage to that person or to someone else, until the light version comes back to bring it back into the light. Or that version learns to get free of that imprisonment, which means it has to pull from a light part of itself in order to heal itself and bring it back into balance. This is all complicated because it is complicated. There's so many nuances to our souls that it's very hard to put it in very clear terms. But when I look at that, I see that when we imprison darkness, and the darkness imprisoned, I'm not talking darkness, it is a version of that light soul has to choose to be imprisoned. How many times do you follow yourself in your lifetime where you're like, you know what, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. So you can make pacts without even realizing it, that you could take parts of your light side and imprison them into a place because you just don't want to be here anymore. You don't want to do this anymore. So you're allowing a dark entity to take part of your soul and place it into imprisonment, or we do it ourselves. There's so many times that we imprison ourselves. It's insane. So this cycle continues forever. It doesn't stop unless we actually go into these parts and say, okay, I'm done with this. I need to heal these parts myself. Or we choose to go into other souls to help heal them. But what do you do when you have a light and a dark side that are both in prison? What do you do if the light side chooses to stay in prison, the dark side wants to get out of the prison, but can't because the light side doesn't have the capacity to do that? There's many people for instance, there's lots of people in the world that don't have the strength or the ability to be able to heal the dark sides themselves. They have the ability, but they don't have the strength to do it. They don't have the know-how. They don't have the understanding of how to do it. So one of the things that I do is I can go in and go into the dark parts and heal the dark parts of people's souls, or reunite them back into balance again. I do this a lot, and that's one of the things I was gifted to do. Not everybody's good at doing that, but everybody has the capability of doing it. And you have to have very little fear and the understanding that it can be done. Because if you believe it can't be done, it's never going to. You're not going to get anywhere with it. You can't go into a spiritual space with the doubt that this isn't real, this can't be done, none of things ever going to change. Because that is detrimental, because when you're in the spirit realm, everything is based on belief and thought. Everything. So you can't manipulate, you do anything unless you believe you can. And also allow your higher self to guide that understanding. When I go in to heal someone, or heal a place or heal history. You can't. I myself, Joseph, isn't doing it. I'm allowing my higher self to take over, because they're the ones that have the understanding of everything that I'm seeing and doing and knowing where to go. I'm guiding that process, but I'm being guided the whole time. So it's kind of me, and it's also my higher self that is doing this process. But the understanding comes from a higher self. I have no idea what I'm going to see, what I'm going to expect, and how I'm going to solve that problem, because the knowledge is already there. My higher self just allows me to remember how to do it. So it's the same thing when you're going into to heal a dark part of yourself. Your soul already knows how to heal it. But you have to choose to forgive, accept, and believe that it's done. And this whole understanding about forgiveness is also extremely important, because there's things that yourself, your parts of past lives, part of your soul, that has done some pretty terrible things. But that's all done in the understanding of balance of things. Like, there's going to be light and dark sides to every aspect of the human being and human existence. It doesn't mean you have to fall imprisoned by it. Like, how would you say, when you are showing the dark parts of yourself and the things that you have done, you shouldn't be imprisoned by that. You shouldn't judge yourself, because ultimately you've already done that a million times anyway. But that part was done specifically to help you learn, to help someone else learn. And we don't learn unless we're shown or see or experience it. So when, for instance, when your soul does something terrible to someone else, that whole lesson, everybody learns around that person, around yourself, and you yourself also learns. So it creates like an echo of learning that could go on for generations, even depending on how severe the thing that you've done. Could you imagine going to a planet and you had the power to destroy that planet? You come down to the planet and your soul chooses to destroy this planet, and they look at you as a demonic being that comes down that destroys that world. Well, what happens if there's people on a moon that's seen that happen, that's seen you, that's seen the whole situation? And how many generations are going to go by, and your name is going to be like you're this horrible being of darkness that came down to destroy the world. But in doing so, though, gave these other planetary things in that system the ability to expand and grow into something extraordinary. But before that, they were just bickering amongst each other, non-stop, killing for generations and generations. War constantly going. But that event had brought everybody together, and they're able to grow and move into a higher plane of existence, for instance. And that never would have happened unless your soul did that. So there's a lot more things going on here than we truly understand. So your higher self is the guiding light to what it is that, how you navigate, and why it is that things happen in the way they happen. It's one of those things that it's really important to allow yourself to be guided through these experiences, not to judge either side. How many times in life do you come across someone that's did something horrible, then you discover, when you talk to that person, the reason why they did it? Not saying you have to agree to them, but you start to understand why that occurred. And you're never necessarily always going to say that made sense, but there's going to be times where you're going to be like, holy shit, that actually makes a lot of sense now why that person did what they did. Well, that's a universal scale, and you could put extremes on either one or the other. But the only way we learn as human beings is suffering. We learn ridiculous amount through suffering. We learn happiness and joy through love. But through suffering, we learn extraordinary things. I wish it wasn't that way. But there is a lot of learning in suffering. Tons of it. But I think, most people would agree with me, there's a time when you have to stop the suffering. The learning's already complete. It's time to move on. It's time to bring all this back into balance so we can be at peace again. What happens to a race of beings that never truly had suffering? You often wonder, what the hell were we thinking when we chose to go through a suffering learning, so to speak? Because suffering is huge. Like it covers a huge amount of things attached to suffering, and you could say that it's all evil. Suffering's evil. There's evil thing. The only way you suffer is through evil things or evil acts. But how would you know what it was like to lose something if you never experienced it? So maybe there was a time in history that people would do things to other people, but nobody really truly understood anybody's side of it. So you had this, say, elite race of beings that were very, very loving, and they were doing things to people that they never really truly understood what they were doing to them. They could have been doing experiments on them. They could have came to a planet and they thought they were just human beings on a planet, but they're so ridiculously high up, they never even looked at us as anything more than simply just ants. So they basically, all this time, they were eating us the whole time and didn't even know that we were sentient beings. So we don't really truly understand why the universe chose to go in a whole learning of suffering. But we did. Now, if those beings now were humans and living a human experience, they would start to understand what suffering really means and the importance of looking at everything that's alive, to understand that they could all be suffering because of us. Like, how many animals that we start to discover are way more intelligent than we ever thought. Now we're even discovering that trees and fungus and plants are also alive. But to what level are they alive? So you start to see that when you live in a world of suffering, you start to see many sides of things that you might not have actually even paid attention to before. And your soul starts to learn and expand in ways that you would never, that were never possible before. But at some point, when you learn these lessons, we have to say, okay, we're done. And I think we're at that stage now that the human race is done with the lessons. But the problem is we have all these parts of ourselves that are broken, that are beaten down. See, when some traumatic event happens, we lose parts of ourselves. But we also take parts of ourselves and place them in safekeeping. For instance, if you have you have childlike energy and you're going through a really, really hard time, you take that energy and you place it into a safe place. So when you're done learning that lesson, you're able to bring that love back into yourself, the childlike essence back into yourself, because it's important that we bring these parts back. Because that now will rebalance ourselves with the understanding of all that suffering that we went through. Now brings us to a whole never level of understanding. But for us, we have to go into all our broken parts of ourselves, the planet, in order to be able to bring ourselves out of that suffering. Because that suffering is going to continue unless we heal it, unless we actually come together and heal it. And one of the most, how would you say, the most unsuccessful parts of people don't want to listen to healing. When you say you're going to heal something, a lot of people walk away and say, I'm not going to, it's boring, and blah, blah, I don't want to listen to that. But that's the one thing we need in order to save ourselves, is to heal our partners, to heal our friends, to heal our families, to heal strangers, to heal places. That's the only way that we're able to break free of this constantly cycling suffering that we're going through. If you have a baby and it's starving, are you just going to let it starve until it dies? Or are you going to feed it, nurture it, and it stops crying? Stop suffering. So if we have the understanding that if the baby's crying because it's hungry, we feed it. So why aren't we doing that to the rest of the human race? No, we're more worried about stupid things that have very little meaning, instead of actually coming together as a human race to heal each other, to stop the wars, to stop the suffering. People want to be healed. They want to live a happy life. But do they really? Because if they truly did, we will be coming together to heal everyone on this planet. But the people that do are persecuted. All throughout history, some of the most important people that would give their lives to heal people were persecuted for it. Nobody wants to support healers. They want to listen to superficial things that mean very little. They want to listen to half-truths. They want to be fooled. They want to be manipulated. They want to continue to suffer. Because if they wanted to come out of that suffering, would they not? But then you go back and you turn this whole thing and you look at it in a different perspective. People don't know how to get themselves out of suffering. They feel trapped. Because in a way they are. All of us are trapped. In some way, in some version. And the only way that we're ever going to come out of that trap is to realize that we're trapped in the first place. Because once you realize you're trapped, so okay, I'm trapped. I have my hands tied behind my back. I'm going to have to get my hands free. If you don't know your hands are tied behind your back, then how are you ever going to set them free? So that's the problem with the human race right now, is we're in a constant circulating energy of suffering. Anyway, I'm just going to go into a journey here. I'm going to ask the spirit realm, what can the human race do to get out of the suffering? The circle of suffering, circle of pain, circle of evil. I instantly feel like a spear go in my gut, and it goes deep into the earth, and I'm staked to a stone rock. I'm left there, like I'm literally on that rock with a spear through my belly, and it basically makes me throw up blood, and I will literally be there until I die, and then I'll die, and my bones will eventually break apart, and there might be a remnants of myself still attached to that spear. And then the being takes the spear and looks for another person, pulls it out and throws it at somebody else, and they're speared up against a rock, and over time they just die a slow, painful death. And they rot away and their bones fall to the ground, and they go, and it continues over and over and over again. This being, though, is getting really fat. His belly is growing and growing and growing to the point now that he's having a hard time picking the spear up because his belly is dragging on the ground. He's even having a hard time walking. And he's so when he cuts the spear, he's get a bit dizzy because he's so overweight that he's even having a hard time reaching the spear. And then then eventually he gets so fat that he can't ever reach the spear anymore. And he just sits there with his massive belly. He doesn't even stand up anymore. His belly is the one that's holding him up. He's not actually even standing. His belly grows and his feet now are dangling off the ground. And he's kind of just laying there on his belly, slumped over. Doesn't even feel like getting, it just doesn't have to do anything anymore. He just keeps getting fed and he gets fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. Now he doesn't even have to try anymore because everybody else is doing all the work for him. And he just keeps getting fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. And this is like the human race feeding this being, this devil, negative energy. And he just keeps getting fatter and fatter and fatter. The question is now, this being is starting to regret starting this cycle in the first place because now he's so fat he can't do anything, and now he's in suffering as well. He can't move. But he just keeps getting fatter and he doesn't know how to stop this process. He can't even do anything about it anymore. The only people that can do anything about it is the people that are creating the suffering in the first place. But the weird part about it is there's a whole group of people that are actually worshiping this being that started this process, but this being so fat and bloated from this energy that it can't even do anything anymore. But they keep worshiping and worshiping and worshiping. This being is getting fatter and fatter and fatter, and they don't have any idea that they're worshiping a bloated, fat thing that can't even do anything anymore. But they still do it anyway. It still goes on. It still goes on and still goes on. And this thing just keeps getting fed more and 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 more. It actually gets to a point where it just literally rips itself off this bloated version. And this now fat slug thing is now a separate entity. And this being actually walks back into the shadows and is free, finally free. But this thing that has no mind, it just knows how to feed. It's like a caterpillar that just keeps eating and eating and eating and eating. Gets fatter and fatter and fatter. It doesn't know when to stop. It just keeps getting bigger. And now these people are still worshiping this, and all the energy is going into this big fat blob. And this other part is actually left a long time ago. He doesn't even want anything to do with this place anymore. So this big, huge thing starts to create, it's like, it's starting to be different. It's starting to mature. It's actually starting to have its own mind, its own wants, and it just wants to keep feeding. But it starts to lay babies, actually, and these babies do the same thing. And they start creating this, like slugs are all over the world, feeding on this negative energy. This being is still attached to these things, though. But only as much as it wants to be. But there's something about this being that is changing. It went to a different part of the universe and is learning something different. It's learning a different way of doing things. Because for all that suffering it had for so long, it couldn't separate itself. It started a process of learning, and it literally cut a huge chunk of itself away in order to break free. So it's actually learning something positive, something good. And this other part's all its grossness, all its negativity, all its force-fed negativity and evil, you could say. And now he notices that these parts are now starting to become a huge problem. Because now everybody wants to be this lethargic, fat, gross being. It's like it's putting that energy into the world. And it's creating a world full of people that are lazy, that all they do is want to just feed negativity into this being. It's like every time you use your phone, you're feeding it, because you're just throwing this mindless, lazy energy into this being, and it's just feeds and feeds and feeds, and it's creating the human race to follow along this way. This being keeps getting brighter and brighter and brighter, and there's something it's starting to notice. It's trying to fix it's trying to figure out how to fix this issue. Then in a way it created. But it's also the human race that created it. And the human race is feeding this being. It's almost like if we start all eating healthy. We start going walks every day. We put the phone down permanently. We actually take all our phones and we throw them in a big fire and burn them and go back to an older type of communication. Or communication that didn't have the capability of scrolling in social media, for instance. Just a phone. That's all it did. So if you want to call somebody, you talk to them on the phone. Because that interaction is different than what is happening now. The phones are barely used for phones. They're just more for enslavement than anything. They're instruments of enslaving you, not setting you free. So one way to set things free is to create a phone that's just a phone, that has no other capability. Doesn't even connect to the internet. The only way it could connect to the internet is simply just to communicate. Video chat, talking. It can't do anything else. It can't take pictures. It can't actually do video recording. It can't do any of that stuff. All it can do is communicate. You can't surf the internet. All this stuff is taken away. It starts to get people to having to talk to each other again. And it starts to starve these beings. But we all know that's not the way the world's moving. The world's moving in a way that keeps feeding these beings. And this other being is actually ridiculously bright now. Its actually dark side now this version of itself has merged, and it's now a really bright angel. But it sees that it has a part of itself that is out of control. And it has to figure out how to bring that back into itself. And it comes back to the earth, and it sees how things have changed. It doesn't even recognize the world anymore, because the world's changed so much that it doesn't know how to even make sense of it. So he actually looks at the world, and he starts sending energy to every single person that will listen. Even subtle whispers for people that don't want to listen. They put their phone down for a while. Set it down. Look at the persons around you. Look at nature. Start experiencing life again. But the draw, the addiction of the phone is so strong that people have a hard time stopping that. it's constantly talking to them in their minds, because these slug things that are feeding off this negative energy are whispering all the time into you to do this, to do that, to do this. You need to do this, you need to check this, you need to do that. Because every time you pick your phone up, you're feeding these beings. And they get fatter and fatter and fatter. And then they split, and then there's even more of them with this voice, more of them speaking. So this being gets brighter and brighter and brighter, and sends energy throughout all the people of the world. And the ones that are listening, it gets ridiculously bright and pulls them out of this world. And then these beings actually get so fat that they actually start merging with souls of the earth. So then it's almost like people just become like these beings, and just it's really, really messed up, because people got to the point where they don't even look like they even move anymore. They hook themselves up to machines, and all they do is these things is feed off them and feed off them and feed off them until their skeletal remain, just die, just like that thing in the spear. And they die in these machines, and they turn into skeletons over time. And somebody just comes along, cleans them up, and there's another body shoved in his place. Robots do all the cleaning, take care of you. It's like the human race is gone. It's a reflection of itself. But there is some that survive, taken to a different dimensional space. But the world, the earth that we knew, no longer exists. It's now like these energy beings are so fat and so gross that they literally become part of your soul. And your soul is trapped there on earth. Time flies, like not flies by, they're just showing me this time sped up really, really, really fast. Like, and this goes on for a very, very, very long time. There's even babies that are being born in like factories by machines that feed, that literally are taken and plucked into these things. So after a while, there's not even, human beings are just food. They're not even really, they just live in a fantasy world. And they do that until they die, and then they're just come in, and it's like, this is what ends up happening. The machines run the earth and literally just use human beings as feeders into this state, but they live in a fantasy world. They believe they're actually living a whole lifetime. This, like I say, it's like the Matrix in a way, but if you wake up, what are you waking up to exactly? A world full of machines. I guess that would be kind of like the Matrix, wouldn't it? But it's very, very much like that. The question is, are we living in this world right now? Or is this all, or is this the future? Is the question, isn't it? I'm not really going to answer that. They're not allowing me to answer that question. But this is, it felt like it's happened. Or it's happening. I believe it's more like happening. It hasn't completely happened yet. But it will continue if we don't change. Anyway, something to think about for sure. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And if you wish to do a journey with me, you can visit my website at amonrosstheawakening.com. And you can visit my Northern Light pages as josephbradleyawards.com and yukonskies.com. Again, thank you very much, and that will definitely hopefully get you thinking, because that's what it's meant to do. Take care.